The Hormuz Strait in the Middle East could be opened in the near future, but only if the United States of America meets the strict demands put forward by Tehran. Iran and Oman have reached a mutual understanding regarding the geographical coordinates of the shipping route through the Hormuz Strait, and a joint statement is in the final stages of preparation. Provided that the process is not hindered by third countries, primarily the United States of America. This is the official statement of the representative of the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ismail Baghai. At the same time, he added that even in the event of such an agreement between Tehran and Muscat, it alone does not guarantee security in this strategically important waterway as long as Americans are present in the region who do not comply with Tehran's ultimatums. And at the same time, a massive information campaign began in Iran, calling on the people to take revenge on the Americans. And now, the most important thing, Iran, for opening the Strait of Hormuz, demanded that Donald Trump completely lift the naval blockade. The complete lifting of all sanctions. And pay attention, a public acknowledgement by the United States of America that they are unable to stop the war in Lebanon, as they promised in the previous Memorandum of Understanding signed back in June. So how did Donald Trump respond to all this? Well, Donald Trump spent the whole day today fending off statements that the US has a critical shortage of ammunition. And once again, he stated that he was ready to completely destroy Iran and deliver the most powerful strike against Iran since World War II. But he changed his mind after the Iranians simply begged him not to do it. Also, Trump spent the whole day today defending Peter Hicks, who is the War Minister of the United States of America. He states that he is absolutely satisfied with his work. And in general, all these talks about supposedly not having enough missiles and the war not going according to plan are all lies. And those who spread this information are traitors to the homeland, and they should be tried and put in prison. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. There are a lot of new variables that have appeared here. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel right now. Take a second, check if you're subscribed to the channel. Maybe you've been watching for a long time, but still haven't subscribed yet. If you are subscribed, thank you so much. If not, click subscribe right now. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I would appreciate every single one of your subscriptions. So, the agreement on opening the Strait of Hormuz is almost ready. Iran is finalizing the coordination with Oman regarding the procedure for ship movement through the Strait of Hormuz. But, as Tehran states, the agreement between the two coastal countries does not mean the reopening of the waterway. Tehran states that it needs a number of guarantees from the United States of America so that ships can pass through the Strait of Hormuz without hindrance. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi outlined Iran's demands, stating that the United States of America must reverse actions that, in his opinion, violated previously undertaken commitments. In fact, Iran is now demanding exactly the same concessions from the United States of America that Washington was ready to make in exchange for rolling back Iran's nuclear program. Iran is now not even... This is where things get really interesting. The Iranian Foreign Ministry is demanding the following from Donald Trump: a cessation, a complete cessation, of the naval blockade of Iranian ports. In other words, the US military must leave the region. Discussion of the sanctions reimposed on Iran after the breakdown of the ceasefire, especially regarding the oil sector, and the resumption of negotiations on Tehran's frozen assets. In simple terms, lift the sanctions and return the frozen assets. And third, consideration of the issue of the United States' inability to ensure stability in investments, as provided for in the Memorandum of Understanding reached with Washington in June. That is, Iran, mind you, is now dictating demands to the United States in order to open the Strait of Hormuz. Let me remind you. According to Donald Trump's plan, The United States was ready to make these concessions to Iran, lift sanctions, unfreeze assets, lift the blockade, and so on, in exchange for shutting down the nuclear program. That was the original idea. Now Iran is demanding exactly the same concessions just for opening the Strait of Hormuz, which, I remind you, was completely open before the war. But the biggest, if I may say so, slap in the face to Donald Trump was here. When asked whether Iran is essentially complying with Article 5 of the June agreement, which obliges Iran to make every effort to ensure safe commercial shipping for 60 days, that same Harry Babadi simply answered no. He says, no, we are not complying with anything. Next is his quote, Article 5 only sets out guidelines, not a final operational plan. The new agreement between Iran and Oman is presented as a completely new model, reflecting the current security environment, and not as a continuation of the previous 60-day agreement. This means that shipping routes through the Strait will change. A significant portion of commercial traffic will pass through Iranian territorial waters, and the rest will go through Omani waters, but there is still an issue with coordination there. Harry Babadi stated that the agreement reached reflects a new strategy for exercising effective sovereignty over the Strait, emphasizing that Iran does not intend to regularly close this waterway during peacetime. If you didn't understand, Harry Babadi is directly stating that they don't care about the deal Trump made in June, which the American president was so proud of. He says, yes, we don't care. Yes, we signed something there in June. Trump fell for all of this. He announced a pause in the strikes, but he says we never intended to fulfill it anyway. He says, yes, it was written there that Iran supposedly agreed to open the Hormuz Strait, to make every effort to keep it open, but those were just principles. He says it didn't actually obligate us to anything. Well, it was written and that's it. He says, who cares? No, we didn't do anything about it. But the main thing is that the US is no longer at the negotiating table regarding the Hormuz Strait. That's also important to keep in mind. They're not at the table. Iran and Oman are at the table, while the Americans watch from the sidelines. And here it's important to note that the agreement prepared by Iran and Oman provides for Tehran to gain control over ships entering the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, and Oman is supposedly to gain control over those exiting. But it still remains unclear exactly how this control will be determined. Negotiators from the Persian Gulf countries insist that the countries of the region carry out their own supervision of ship inspections and that the payment of fees be completely voluntary. Tehran wants to charge ships passing through the Strait 5 to 7% of the cargo's value, and Oman is discussing fees of 3%. Meanwhile, the US advocates for maintaining the pre-war status quo, meaning no fees at all. But at the same time, the Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister, Kazem Garibabadi, states that the agreement, quote, is designed in such a way that commercial vessels will pass through Iranian territorial waters, both when entering and when leaving. At the negotiations with Oman, an agreement in principle was reached. That is, Iran says, full control over entry and exit from the Strait of Hormuz will be held by Iran. Yes, he says, some of the ships will pass through Oman's territorial waters, but that doesn't mean anything, only with Iran's approval. In fact, this means total control of the Hormuz Strait by Iran. And according to Kazem Garibabadi, no negotiations have been held with the United States of America in recent days, but Tehran received a message from them. It said, quote, a full readiness to return to fulfilling their obligations under the Memorandum of Understanding signed in mid-June. Let me remind you, that memorandum allowed 2 months to reach a final agreement, including on the nuclear program. And this deadline expires on August 17, that's literally in just about 10 days. However, the confrontation between the US and Iran has intensified, and they have started exchanging strikes again. Against this backdrop, leading shipping associations have called on the United Nations to oppose any duties and fees for servicing ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz. 8 of the largest maritime organizations have signed a joint open letter to the UN and the International Maritime Organization, warning that the introduction of fees could lead to higher prices for consumers around the world and undermine the principles of freedom of navigation. Next, I will quote from the joint statement of the maritime organizations. Once such a precedent is set, it will become increasingly difficult to resist similar measures elsewhere, creating uncertainty for international shipping and global trade. These consequences go beyond transportation costs, contributing to rising energy prices, inflation, and economic instability. Ultimately, these consequences will result in loss of life, affecting the livelihoods of people around the world. It would seem that the world's policeman, the United States of America, should somehow respond to this and finally set things right. So how did Donald Trump respond to all of this? First, today he once again publicly assured that the Iranians were simply begging him to stop the war and claimed that they were ready to do anything, as long as Trump would call off his historic massive strike. He again said that the US was preparing to launch the largest strike against Iran since World War II. However, it was called off after requests from Tehran. Next is a quote from Donald Trump. "We're beating the hell out of them, but I would prefer to make a deal because I don't want to kill people. But at some point we were ready for the largest attack ever, and over the past few months we've been hitting them very hard. But we were fully ready. We were completely prepared for the largest attack since World War II. And then they called me and said, please don't do this, let's talk. And then they say, we never said that. You know what? The fake media knows that they really did say it. They asked, they begged, but we're negotiating. We'll see what happens. However, they respect us." End of quote. But in recent days, as you know, a scandal has emerged after several US publications and think tanks stated that maybe Donald Trump really would like to deliver the most powerful strike against Iran since World War II. But they just don't have the means to do it. They say maybe he'd like to, but they don't have the ammunition. Supposedly there is a critical shortage of missiles and shells after his brilliant military operation. Moreover, the most critical ones were CNN, and on Tuesday they reported that the American military had used up almost 80 of their interceptors for the key THAAD missile defense system. And according to several sources, senior American military officials warned the White House that the Pentagon's ammunition stocks are dangerously low and that continuing the war is very risky. In response, Trump stated that the United States of America has a huge amount of ammunition, and some types of shells are even surplus. And in general, quote, defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. The same rhetoric was taken up by the Minister of War, Pete Hegseth, and now there are already leaks that Trump actually summoned Pete Hegseth and asked him, listen, what's going on with the ammo stockpiles? Like, how could this happen? In particular, the Washington Post wrote that Trump is dissatisfied with Pete Hegseth's performance as Minister of War. But Trump stated that all of this is a blatant lie. Moreover, he suddenly started to get very nervous and said that he would actually put in jail all those who dare to open their mouths and say that the American army supposedly lacks ammunition. Next, I will give a long quote from Donald Trump. Fake news? Fake news, as usual, spreads false and completely unfounded rumors. I am extremely pleased with the work that Pete Hegseth is doing. Everything was outstanding, including our attack on Venezuela, where the result was achieved in less than 1 day. which allowed us to bring to justice one of the most disgusting criminals in the world, Nicolas Maduro. Similarly, Iran, where the country was devastated in order to prevent it from ever having nuclear weapons. The operation is going very well. Pete Hegseth is highly respected in the military and has made a huge improvement. This rumor was started in the Washington Post. Well, literally, as Trump writes, Washington Compost. Well, you get the reference, right? It's a joke. I'll continue the quote. One of the worst media outlets in this business. Even though we told them that their story was completely false. But they still went ahead and published it anyway. Actually, I really consider their fake report to be treasonous. Well, I'll add that before this he says that all those people who claim there aren't enough missiles, who say the army has problems, who say we didn't win the war in Iran, he says all of them should be put in jail. What right do they have to open their mouths and say that we supposedly didn't win the war with Iran? Well, there you go. There's an inconsistency here. According to the media, the Pentagon still held an emergency meeting for some reason about the shortage of ammunition. You'd think they'd say, oh, we've got plenty of ammunition. More than enough. But for some reason, the Pentagon held a meeting. The U.S. Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg held an emergency meeting with his subordinates regarding the need to replenish American arsenals. Feinberg treated the situation as a crisis and demanded an urgent acceleration of weapons procurement procedures. According to NBC News, Obrasapo Condamto. Feinberg called the meeting after receiving an angry phone call from Donald Trump, who allegedly expressed disappointment that the shortage of ammunition had become an obstacle to expanding military operations against Iran. He also threatened Feinberg with dismissal. But friends, the main thing here is not to get confused. Donald Trump said everything is fine and there is plenty of ammunition, so much that they don't know what to do with it. Yet, for some reason, Patriot interceptors aren't being sent to Ukraine due to a shortage. Don't be confused, there's no shortage. But friends, we also remember very well that at the beginning of the war, Donald Trump publicly promised the capitulation of Iran. After that, he stated that Iran had already capitulated several times. Then he stated that the war would definitely not drag on. No more than 4, well, at most 6 weeks, he said, at most 6 weeks, and there would be nothing left of Iran at all. We remember how Trump claimed more than 30 times that he had already won the war with Iran, and so on. And also, just recently, literally on Saturday, Trump said that by tomorrow the Strait of Hormuz would be completely open. Then he said, listen, the Strait of Hormuz is already open, and actually no one ever closed it. Then he added, no, the agreement with Iran is almost ready. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow for sure, the Strait of Hormuz will be open. Today is already Thursday evening. Well, I believe Trump, I really do. Do you believe him? Well, meanwhile, in Tehran, which according to Donald Trump is completely conquered, these kinds of vengeful billboards have appeared, created by the propaganda machine of the Iranian regime, the Chpon, which are trying to show both its own people and the outside world that supposedly the Islamic Republic of Iran still firmly controls the situation, while the United States of America is collapsing, that's all. It does remind me a bit, of course, of the Russians. You know, Vladimir Putin. Ah, the unwashed Russians. For what, 20 years now we've been told that America will soon fall. Have you seen the US national debt? Yeah, it's going to collapse soon. The dollar is about to collapse. And Europeans will soon freeze without Russian gas. And we will prosper. What's happening now on the streets of Tehran really reminds me of this Russian propaganda. But the point of all these banners is that the Iranian authorities are calling on their people to take revenge on the United States of America, which clearly doesn't suggest that these very Iranians are supposedly begging Donald Trump for some kind of negotiations. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support an independent YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.